Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Harosheth Hagoyim. Because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel, in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands." Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," said Deborah. "But because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer, and went quietly to him, while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died.
I knew with that reading that I would need somebody who would still speak to me after I asked them to read that chapter. And one of the television celebrities that I used to absolutely love watching was Lionel Blair. Who remembers Lionel Blair? And Lionel Blair had a program called Name That Tune. Do you remember? Some people could get the tunes after hearing a few notes. Some people, amazingly, got the tunes with hearing next to none. You know, like one or two. Oh, I know what that is. I never knew how they were able to do that. But I liked watching Name That Tune. And I think we've all played Name That Tune, maybe frustratingly, if you've been in a shop. Back in the days when we had department shops, do you remember? There was many of them, now there's one or two of them. And sometimes these shops would be playing a version of a tune you would know, but it might not be by the musician who originally played the tune. So I would be standing there going, dum, 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 dum. I know that tune. Dum, 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 dum. Leave those kids alone. Oh, Pink Floyd The Wall. You know, I would work it out. Often, it would take me quite a while, but if I managed it, I was quite pleased with myself. Did you find it easy to hear God's tune in Judges chapter 4? Did you hear in there a collection of wonderful promises about God? From a general who appears to be a coward, and a woman who appears to be homicidal? Did you hear some great promises for you this morning in Judges chapter 4? Some promises that would stop you blowing around, you know, blowing around like a little piece of sand through the atmosphere. Many people just blow through life like little bits of sand. Well, the first thing in the first 5 verses I'm going to show you is you see something which is great about God's hand. Then in the middle section, you see something great about God's promises. And lastly, when we get to Jael and Sisera inside that tent, you see something great about God's salvation. So I'm just going to take those 3 angles, go through the text chronologically, and see how each one would give us an anchor point and stop us from being, well, I suppose, at the mercy of our circumstances. I don't want anybody to be living life merely responding to circumstances. I think your life will flourish far more if you live it intentionally in light of the promises of God. So let's try. Here's the first thing. God's hand. After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan. Notice that. How did they end up there? Because God sold them there. God's hand was there. However, they cried to the Lord for help, and Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time, and she held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. So there you see God's hand sold them into slavery, and God's hand is the one which has commissioned Deborah to lead and to serve. Here's something. God's hand, it's far better it be heavy than it be absent. Just like that, percolate in your brain. That's just the first point I want to make. I hope we all resolve to acknowledge it is better in my life if God's hand is heavy rather than it be absent. Now, of course, the best of all is God's hand being outrightly in favour. But what you'll find when you read the scripture is it's not much point being disobedient and then saying, God bless my disobedience. Right? That's a prayer that rarely, if ever, gets answered. So God's hand, on many occasions in the Old Testament church, is heavy. But I'm saying to you, it's better heavy than if it were absent. Well, what about your suffering, you think? You're not saying my suffering is always deserved. No, I'm not saying that all suffering is instantly deserved. But what I am saying is that God's hand can be on your suffering, working a good from it. But here's the point when it comes to believing that. I don't see the good. Sometimes you might see the good of suffering. Sometimes I can see the good of suffering. You know, by some people's suffering, I've seen families come together that if that suffering had not taken place, those 3 daughters would never have gone into the same room as their father, let alone been in the same house as their father, let alone crossed the same street as their father. It took for the father to be given 18 months of life. And then on the closing days of that life, people who had been apart for decades made their peace. Well, I got to see a good out of one suffering, and something that many of us would never have put odds on, even in Vegas. But we've got to recognize that a lot of the time, maybe more of the time, we're not able to discern the good that can arise out of the suffering we are in. Would we really want to make an equation that says, unless I can see it, it's not there? How much of reality do I not see? Do I then deny it's not there? Do I just say, if I don't see it, it can't be happening? The measure of God bringing goodness out of suffering is not predicated on me fully understanding it. The Apostle Paul says to the church at Rome, not all things work for good if you understand it, for those who love God. He says all things work for good for those who love God. So Deborah and Jael and the mysterious tune that's playing in Judges chapter 4, there's the first note that rises out of it, and I hope you can identify it and identify with it. God's hand. Well, it's better heavy in my life than absent in my life. because as long as it's heavy, though I may suffer, a good will come from it. A good, you say, of cities being flattened and people being starved and wire being built around places. A good when nations construct walls. A good when people are being subjugated to terrorism on a daily basis. Yes. A good can come even from that. The second point, after God's hand, we see God's promises. The Lord, the God of Israel, Deborah says, commands you, go and take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and go to Mount Tabor. I'll lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots, and give him into your hands. Now, there's a full stop. Barak said to her, good, you've given me God's promise. You know, Deborah, the thing is that that's all I ever need in my life. I mean, I've got my human weakness, but if I live in God's promise, then I'll head off in the next 5 minutes, and Sisera and the army will indeed be handed in. I mean, circumstantially, it looks like that's not going to happen. But I'm not living in light of circumstances, Deborah. You've brought the promise of God as a leader and as a servant of the Lord, and that's good enough for me. That's how it maybe would read in the ideal world, and that's maybe how you would like it to read if it was you. It's how I would like it to read if it was me. Here's the promise of God. Thank you, God, for your promise. It's sufficient. We were singing that. Grace sufficient. No, that's not the reply from Barak the general. Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't, I won't go. And then we get the comical scene where Deborah says, I will come with you. And the army is rightly defeated, but Sisera at this point escapes. You see, Barak wanted more than the promise of God. He wanted something more. It appears that he views Deborah as some kind of talisman, some kind of magical object. If I have her, then I'll be successful. You know, he's basically thinking this. Jesus, comma. That's how I like to imagine it. Jesus, comma. Well, what does that mean, living Jesus, comma? I believe in Jesus. Yeah, I'm quite comfortable with that. But there's a comma here. Jesus, comma, and my learning. Jesus, comma, and my friends. You know, in order to get it done, in order to live this life. Jesus, comma, and then people add in things after the comma. Because what? The promise of Jesus isn't enough. Jesus, full stop. When Deborah closed her sentence, there was a full stop there. The promise of God had been made. That's enough, actually. God's promise is enough. I don't need to go adding into it and saying, oh, if you come, Deborah, oh, but if I get that degree, if I get that next house, if I get that next... Look, we live in light of the promises of God. But if the UN can only negotiate a peace, the answer's Jesus. Full stop. For our brokenness. So we want to live like that, learn the promises of God, and lean on them. You know, it's okay to be concerned about the age in which you live. And you turn that concern into intentional prayer. It's not okay, Paul says, to be blown around with every notion and wind and doctrine. So you're like a little leaf. Don't be like that. Don't be flapping like that. You don't need to be. If we take seriously the promises of God, then we have the means to root ourselves in stability, to overcome Class A drugs, addictions to porn, alcohol, a furious short temper, a fear of the future, bereavement, war, civil war. You have a means of not succumbing to panic in light of these circumstances, because his promises are greater than our circumstances. And we lean on those promises. And that not only blesses us, that's a witness to other people. And a better witness than just arguing with them about why they're wrong. I mean, there's some value in that, but very little value, really, when you think about it. You end up winning arguments and losing souls. So remember that second little note ringing from Judges chapter 4. God's hand better heavy than absent. The whole of the Bible talks about that. Better the hand heavy than absent. And God's promises higher than our circumstances. Now, I don't know what your circumstances are like. Some of your circumstances are probably middling. Some of your circumstances are maybe in the stratosphere of being great, and others have circumstances that are really, really troubling them. Here's the thing: the promises are always greater than any of them, and all of them added up. Here's the third point: God's salvation. That starts in 10 and it runs all the way to the end of the chapter. But if you're like me, your mind's in the last verses. When Jael brings this general into the tent and reaches for a nail and a hammer, and as he lies down, she drives the nail straight into him, killing him. Salvation comes by hammer and nail. You know, in the next chapter, the Jews write a song about this. They've been singing a song about how salvation comes by a hammer and a nail for thousands of years. I want you to think about this now. The Jews have been singing a song that salvation comes by a hammer and a nail. Remember when I was in that department store? Bum, 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 bum. What's that bass line? Bum, 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 bum. It's Roger Waters. Bum, bum, bum. It's Pink Floyd, The Wall. Do you think there was a day on a hill far away when Jews stood there and they're watching a hammer and a nail, a hammer and a nail, a hammer and a nail, a hammer and a nail? Look what they're doing to this guy. A hammer and a nail as Jesus hangs there, as they drill in the nails with the hammers. And do you think maybe it possible that some of them turn to each other? I think I recognize this tune. I'll leave it there.